Only just recently I got more into game collecting. Not in the sense of collecting valuable or expensive games, but more like Pokemon cards. I want to collect a certain released version of games or complete a whole set of a series I like. Which brought me to Inazuma 11, as not that long ago I managed to finish that collection on the DS and 3DS. It is a series I have enjoyed a lot back in the day, and while the franchise is still ongoing, I got left behind at the first series. Some choices were made and certain direction was taken, which pushed me away from this franchise. I remember the Inazuma 11 games as something cool and a lot of fun, but the last time I played an Inazuma game was a very long time ago. In a time where I was younger and looked very differently at games than I do now. So now that the collection is completed, I thought it was time to refresh my mind on this series and see, after all this time, if these games are still as good as I remember. The games might still work in today's world of gaming, but it could as easily be a blast from the past that doesn't work and aged very badly. Or maybe the games weren't even so good to begin with. Either way, let's see if the Inazuma 11 games are still good games. Inazuma 11 is a never-ending underdog story about a young boy named Mark Evans. He has a burning passion and love for football and wants nothing more but to share that passion and love for the game with his friends. Mark is the captain of his school football team, a school football team that in the past was famous and known as the Inazuma 11. However, that team faded into legend, and in today's world this school football team is on the verge of being disbanded. Mark and his friends take it upon themselves to stop that from happening and aim to restore the name of their school football team by aiming to reach the top of football while walking in the footsteps of the legendary Inazuma 11. It is a very simple story, but honestly, the summary does not do the overall story justice. The summary is how it all begins, but the adventures Mark and his friends embark on throughout the series are far more challenging and darker than you would think at first glance of this summary. Inazuma 11 focuses a lot on friendship, working together, care for one another, be a good person, always finding ways to improve yourself, and most importantly, overcoming challenges. These elements are of course exaggerated to a degree that is expected of a kids show. This series is meant for kids and therefore it had to spice up the story to make it more appealing and enjoyable for them. But they spiced it up a lot. To sort of balance out the good exaggerated elements, they also had to exaggerate the bad ones as well. Which results in rather worrying and terrifying types of scenarios Mark and his friends go through. These scenarios vary from fear of heights, not fitting in with one another, or failing to live up to certain expectations, to emotional manipulation, blackmail, drug usage, depression, attempted murder, actual murder, and even more and worse. And the fun part of it all is that the series is really light-hearted about these scenarios. As a kid, you won't think too much about it or not even notice they are there, but as an adult, I can't help myself but think that there's some pretty insane things happening to kids that want to play football. The pacing is also rather odd. I would describe the pacing throughout the whole series as if you were running down a hill. At first you can handle the speed just fine, but at a certain point you just can't stop running anymore. And if you are not careful enough, you will lose balance and fall. The moment the story picks up some speed, it goes fast. Many things get resolved and revealed quickly after one another, and you just gotta keep up with everything. But what makes it hard to keep up and not losing your balance is that things that get resolved and revealed gets bigger and weirder every time. The problem causers here are the length of the story and its writing. The main focus of the story is overcoming challenges through working together and friendship. But if all you do is overcoming challenges in your story, it will have a snowball effect when that story length increases. This is why these insane scenarios happen to the characters, as the story constantly has to best itself with new and harder challenges to keep the main focus of the story going. Also, after beating the odds countless of times, the value of overcoming these challenges decreases. In the story, characters rarely look back on their resolves and only look ahead and move forward to the next challenge. This makes the overall story just feel like a continuation of the same story with just more and bigger escalations stacking on top of each other, rather than a story that is divided by chapters. But despite all that, I still think the story is just fine. Yes, it's a lot of the same and at a certain point it gets out of hand, but I can still see the fun in that as well. There's a lot of melodrama and cliches in this story, which always works for me, and the over-the-top nature actually is used very well to strengthen its main topic. The story is ultimately very happy, hopeful and even inspiring despite its childish delivery. However, the presentation of the story can make it or break it for you. The story is, besides a couple of short cutscenes and some voice acted moments, completely told through text and bare basic animations. I'm not sure if it's a real term, but I would say it's the Game Boy style of presentation. It's at least the most common way of story presentation on the Game Boy platform. Personally, I like this kind of presentation as it gives a lot of room for your own imagination. The character models do move around and giving you an idea of what they are doing, and the music does a fantastic job in setting the overall tone throughout the series. However, the presentation is very limited. It gives you the build blocks and room to fill in the blanks, but to really get into the story you must like this kind of presentation. Otherwise you will have a really rough time. And I'm not going to lie, I also need to be in a certain mood to really get into a story with this style of presentation. But something that I'm always in the mood for is the gameplay in this series. They went pretty far with the story, but when it comes to the gameplay, there was just no break stopping them. This game is at its core a sports game, which is weird, because when I think of sports games, I usually end up thinking of all the glorified gambling casino games EA and 2K squirt out every year. But no, InazumaEleven is a very different kind of sports game. The easiest way to describe it is that it's an odd mix of Pokemon meets Dragon Ball Z with RPG and tactical elements, but with football. The foundation of the gameplay is more or less the standard ways and rules of football. In the game you got two types of matches. Battles, which happen at random as you walk through the world. They are street football style 4v4 short matches where first one to score within the time limit wins. And then there are official matches, which are 11 versus 11 longer matches where the team with the most goals at the end of the match wins. All players have stats that influence their performance on the pitch. These stats are self-explained, and on top of that every player has a preferred position on the pitch and their stats reflect that position. As you win matches, you gain XP, which in turn levels up your players, which increases their stats and unlocks special moves. And it are these special moves that dials the simple football game up to 11. When there is a duel on the pitch between two or more players, you can choose to do one of these special moves. Doing so means you will win the duel unless the opponent counters with one of their own special moves. At that point, the chance of winning the duel becomes a very well calculated dice throw. It comes down to the player's level, stats, equipment and element to decide who would win this duel. Every player and special move has its own element. Think of fire, wind, earth, and if your element is stronger over the opponent's element, it will give you an edge in the duel. And if there are more of your players involved in a duel with the same element, you even get a bigger advantage. So position play and team setup are fairly important. But in case special moves are not enough to stop your opponent, you can also use special tactics, which involves the whole team. There's a lot to consider when playing these games, and while it are all good ideas, most of them don't really land that well. The game is overall too easy and barely pumps up the difficulty throughout the whole series. You outlevel the opponent rather quickly, and when it comes to the matches, the only important enemy to beat is the goalkeeper. Once the opponent's goalkeeper can't use special moves to block your shots, you get into a situation where whenever you take a shot is a 100% guaranteed goal. Of course, there are also defense moves, but if you don't get into a duel with the opponent, they can't really use those moves. But you can also question if the opponent's goalkeeper can block your shots in the first place, as even when using a keeper's special move, they can still fail. The games cleverly use the touchscreen of the Nintendo DS and 3DS to move around players and to set out your tactics. You could draw out a whole movement map for your team that is equal to the Normandy landing, coming up with a whole calculated tactic and team setup to beat the enemy. Only to realize in the end, rushing the enemy one player at a time would have been just as, if not more, effective. It is such a waste as the game has everything it needs to use more of its potential. If it would have been more difficult, the game would use more, if not all of its RPG and tactical elements potential. But it just doesn't do that. Later in the series they tried to fix it, but in the end they only managed to sort of do it. In the last game there are some moments where you face off against slightly higher leveled opponents from time to time, but that is exclusive to its endgame. There's a serious lack of balance on the difficulty, which in turn drags everything down with it. Don't get me wrong, I really like the gameplay as it's fun and it's one of a kind, but it's just that every time I play one of these games I just get a little bit annoyed that they wasted a large amount of potential that this game has. It's right there, but they just don't use it. On the other hand, it does make the game very relaxing. You don't need to think too much about anything and just let yourself be taken away by the rule of cool, cause damn, those special moves are something else. InazumaEleven is not the first that uses special moves to make football look cooler and more interesting than normal football. Captain Tsubasa, Galactic Football and even Mario Smash Football all did this as well. But in my opinion, InazumaEleven does it the best. The special moves have a lot of variety in them, but all have a very similar feel and charm to them. If football in real life was more like InazumaEleven, I think more people would enjoy it. But a very good element of InazumaEleven is that you don't need to like football to enjoy InazumaEleven. Around half of the people I know that like InazumaEleven don't like or even despise football in real life. There's also a decent amount of customization options for your team. You can recruit over hundreds of players. They can be randoms you fought in battle or characters from the opponent's teams you met in the story or side tournaments. You can choose a team kit, equipment and even learn new player specific special moves. Especially in the last game, endgame is really big. While I do enjoy the story, it's the endgame that I enjoy the most in any of the InazumaEleven games. All the games in the InazumaEleven series are almost the exact same. There are of course here and there some small changes, like more players and moves are added, and of course the story continues, but there's nothing big enough to have a huge impact to make any of the games in the series completely different or stand out. This is the reason why I showed only gameplay from InazumaEleven 3 Team Ogre Attacks, as I think it's the best version of the gameplay this series has to offer. The endgame in any InazumaEleven game feels a bit like a puzzle, where you have to make choices on which player you want and figure out what is the best setup for your current team. And of course, you have to figure out which special move is your favorite. You can choose to copy a team from the game or create a team with a certain gimmick. This is where character design plays a huge role, and overall the design is really nice, as many characters have fun gimmick design or even a theme. There are countless of options to choose from, and on that end it also feels a bit like a card game where you seek a balance to create a team that suits you the best. Looking back now at InazumaEleven after so many years, I would say that objectively these are not bad games. It's unique, it's fun, but overall it wastes a lot of potential along the way. It's right there in arm's reach, they only need to patch it into the game, but they just didn't. Which is a huge shame, because if the game only used a little bit more of its RPG and tactical elements and added slightly more of a challenge to the game, it would go from alright to good. However, the gameplay is still, till this day, fantastic and a lot of fun and is pretty unique. The story is enjoyable if you like over-the-top positivity, melodrama and cliches, but its presentation is still very weak and either a hit or a miss for you. But subjectively, I still freaking love this series. It's fantastic, it's cool, it's unique, it's a bit weird, but overall it's always a joy to play, and that's what matters to me the most. InazumaEleven just worked this way for me, but there are a couple of ways to enter the series and make it work for you. My basic recommendation will be that if you are interested after this review in the series, to start at the first game. If you enjoyed the first one, then you will enjoy the other ones just as much and even more. After the first InazumaEleven game, the series went the Pokemon route. In other words, it would release two versions of the same game. Luckily for the second game, it doesn't really matter which one you play, so that's a free choice for you. The third game, however, is a bit of a different story, as there are two basic versions and one spin-off / altered timeline version. And I would recommend to play the spin-off slash altered timeline version, which is called Team Ogre Attacks. It adds a little bit of more story on top of the already insane story. Plus, in my opinion, it is the best polished version of the gameplay. In case you like the story idea but don't like the sound of the gameplay and its presentation, you could opt to watch the anime. It does tell almost the same story but presented differently and in my opinion better. Especially characters in the anime get a lot more time to develop compared to the games. It is however 127 episodes, so be prepared for a very long sitting. Nonetheless, the anime is nice and is just as much of a joy as the games. But watch the show in Japanese, as the voice acting is done in a pretty fun, cringy but also cool way. If you only care for the gameplay, I would recommend the last game in the series, which is InazumaEleven 3 Team Ogre Attacks. As I stated before, it's the best version of the gameplay in the series and it has the most endgame. And if none of these options are really viable to you, then don't worry, there's one final option. There is a new InazumaEleven game on its way. Oh, well, it's stuck in development hell for a couple of years now. But it does look very promising, and it's not like that I'm very desperate or anything. It's just, I will never lose hope. It will come out. And that concludes my review of InazumaEleven. I hope it was useful to you. If after this video you decide to get into the series, let me know down below what you think of it. If you have more questions, feel free to ask them, and if you have already played one of these games or are a fan of the series, see this review as a discussion starter. You might agree or disagree with me, and I would love to hear your thoughts on the series down below. Thank you very much for watching. If you liked this video, leave a like and consider subscribing. And with that all being said, I wish you a good day and until next time.